This went just...
Well, here we go. Hello all, my name is Marcus Nicholson. I am one of the chefs who works downstairs. I've been working here for 14 years. Jane Zeng asked me to do a presentation on the history of my family, particularly the museum, which is called the Golden Dragon Museum, which my uncle Russell created. Tom, could you play the 3-minute video so this will answer a lot of the questions why I'm here today, and then I'll talk about that afterwards.
In the late 1960s, the Bendigo City Council threw out a challenge to any organisation in the region to put together a tourist destination. We took up the challenge. In 1970, we didn't even have a banking account. 1990, we built the museum. My wife and I, we put it together. And my wife was blonde hair, blue eyes. Although she wasn't Chinese, look at her hair, she was more Chinese than me. What we have housed in the museum is the story of the Chinese from their arrival in Bendigo up to the present day. And their contribution has been huge. Now we have to thank those early Chinese that got all those costumes that gave us the backing to be able to put a museum together. The Chinese came to this region in the early 1850s. In 1871, the Bendigo Easter Fair Society was formed by a group of Europeans. There were 20,000 people in Bendigo, a quarter of that population were Chinese. And because of the colourful ceremonies of the Chinese camps, they asked them would they like to join in and help them to raise money for charity. They placed a levy on every Chinese in Bendigo and surrounding districts and raised over £750. Sent to China, imported over 100 wooden crates full of Chinese costumes. The costumes were silk, gold William thread, and their price was regarded as one of the best clothes in the world. And when they got those costumes, the very next year, in the procession, they had over 1,100 people in it, all in different costumes. It was a real success. Then what they did, from year after year, they tried to make the next Easter fair more attractive and more exciting than the previous one. In the museum, we have Long, he's the oldest imperial dragon in the world. Sun Long, he is the longest imperial dragon in the world, over 100 metres. We have what is regarded as one of the best collections of Chinese processional regalia in the world. We've just been donated a jade chariot weighing 2.5 tonnes. And when you see those Chinese wooden screens, the timber more expensive than gold. We've had people who lived in China all their life, never seen anything like that. But This is also the largest community museum in Australia. We're the first museum in Victoria to get museum accreditation, and we have won just about every award you can win. And I think each and everybody should come along and see our history, because it's so important, not only to us, but to everybody.
So, hello again, guys and girls. Okay, that will probably answer a lot of your questions as to why I'm here today. Let me say just a very little bit about who I am, and I will add to this story. Okay, my name is Marcus Nicholson. I moved from Australia in 1991 by accident, and I decided to stay here permanently by accident. I'm a classically trained pianist. I'm also a chef. I'm also a global, clinical and holistic relationship psychologist for the LGBTIQ+ and straight communities, and I'm a self-taught crystal healer therapist. Okay, the Akashic records of Marcus Nicholson. I am Australian, Chinese, English, Scottish bloodline. My ancestral family's Golden Dragon Museum in Bendigo, Victoria, Australia, was created by my Uncle Russell that you saw. Hang on a minute, I just put this onto the next screen. There we are. And it was built by the Australian taxpayer at a cost of $2.75 million. Today's assembly is all about inclusion, multiculturalism, bringing Chinese culture to Australia, those two cultures clashing and creating a third. And in doing so, my Uncle Russell accidentally giving the city of Bendigo World Heritage status for the largest collection of imperial dragons globally. So, moving on, a brief account of the Chinese belief they came from dragons, the Forbidden City, and the city of Bendigo. Jane Zheng, your Chinese language teacher, mentioned to me that the Chinese believe they came from dragons. I thought I didn't know this, but in fact I had forgotten. My Chinese family in Australia would be not very happy about that. It was also suggested by her that I look up the Forbidden City, and in doing so I discovered that dragon is the symbol of the emperor, power, strength, and good luck. The Chinese believe that dragon's blood flowed in their veins and their bodies contained the souls of dragons. And there's one thing I forgot to write on this sheet of paper here is, every time a new dragon is created, the eyes are always covered with red material, and before they are allowed to parade, the red material gets taken off their eyes, and their eyes have to be dotted with chicken's blood. And once the eyes are dotted with chicken's blood, then the dragons are deemed alive, and then they are allowed to parade. There is, however, no clear stated reason why the Chinese actually do think they have come from dragons. Now, a little bit of history of the city of Bendigo. The indigenous owners of the area were the Wurrong people. Bendigo became Eastern Australia's largest 19th century gold mining economy, and the wealth generated in this area showed in the architectural heritage. There is still just as much gold underground at the moment. They had to stop mining because there was too much water underground and the ground became unsafe. Now, here is a couple of pictures I would like you to see. In 2005, I went to visit my family in Bendigo. I also brought my husband with me, and I introduced him to the rest of the family. This is the current family that I managed to get as many as we could find on the day. Some of them were not there to be found, but they were somewhere else, outside our family museum. And I think that's a pretty good modern day interpretation of how things are now. Okay, moving on. This is what the inside of the museum looks like. Yeah, what am I doing here? Okay. And then I'll move on to one more. Okay, now we come to the kilt bit. Okay, you may be wondering why I walked on stage in a kilt, and a bright red Royal Stuart kilt at that. Well, my surname is Nicholson, and that is Scottish, of course, the first reason why I like wearing a kilt, which, as it happens, only began when I came to the UK and met a long-term friend, Newcastle-born lady called Nicola Sutton from Cramlington, who introduced me to all things kilt-related in Ayrshire in Scotland. I, however, didn't like my Nicholson tartan colours of drab grey and orange, so Nicola suggested bright red Royal Stuart. In Bendigo, there was and still is a Scottish clan called Clan MacLeod, and who since the 1960s were one of the main ethnic groups in Bendigo who raised a significant amount of money for one of the local hospitals. This was always very well received, and so the Bendigo Chinese Association asked them if they would like to lead the way for the Chinese contingent in the annual Easter Monday procession as a mark of respect from the Chinese to the Scottish for their fundraising efforts. The Chinese themselves were also reliant on fundraising to sustain their Chinese traditions in Bendigo. Now I'd like to show you the next slide. I mentioned earlier, Clan MacLeod. Notice all the references. Okay, so we have the city of Bendigo. We have Clan MacLeod, Scottish, written on top. So you've got an Aboriginal name in the middle, Bendigo. You've got Scottish name at the top, Clan MacLeod. And you've also got Australia there and Asia at the bottom. How many Scottish bands, Scottish groups do you know where there is Australian, Aboriginal, Asian, and Scottish all on a bass drum? I think that's pretty cool for multiculturalism and inclusion. Okay, now this is just a random photo that I found off the internet the other day. This is the old dragon, the oldest one, Lung, at the celebration of Federation in Australia. I found that quite telling because actually the Chinese being represented so early in Australian history, that for me was a bit of an eye-opener. All right, now moving on, what do I have to do next? Okay. Here is my Chinese grandfather I never met, Gung Gung. I'll just leave that there for a moment. Now, how the first dragon, Lung, ended up in Bendigo. I had to talk to my male cousin Kim in Australia about this. I didn't know any of this. In 1871, the Chinese community in Bendigo joined the Bendigo Easter procession to aid in fundraising for a local asylum, which became a hospital. In the late 1870s, the Chinese in Bendigo did their own fundraiser within the community, collect enough money to buy lung and regalia. Chinese businesses and individuals all contributed, and they sent an envoy to China to arrange the purchase of their first dragon, Lung, this dragon here, which, by the way, is the same as this one here with my cousin Kim. Same dragon. Okay? And of course, it was shipped back to Australia on a boat as there were no planes in those days. The first reported outing of Lung was in 1892, and so it is likely they received Lung in the late 1891. They also received banners and other regalias. Lung typically requires 46 men to carry his legs and another 6 to carry the head. Back then it was only men only who were allowed to carry an imperial dragon, but also more to the point, because there were 4 Chinese families, my family and 3 other families that created this whole situation in the first place, you also had to be a male member of one of us 4 families to carry the head, otherwise you were not allowed to carry the head at all. Okay, I'll leave that on there for a bit. And moving on. Right, next slide. When you guys were walking in and settling yourselves down, you may have seen a video where there are 4 dragons all parading around the street of Bendigo. That happened on Easter Sunday 2019. and it was the first and only time anywhere in the world globally that this situation has ever happened. On the far left, you will see the night dragon Yalung. To his right, you see Lung, the oldest dragon. To his right, you see Sun Lung. I should explain. Lung means dragon. Yalung means night dragon. Sun Lung means new dragon, and Sun Lung was born the year I was born, 1969. And the latest dragon we've got in 2019 is Dai Gum Lung, which stands for Big Gold Dragon. And here is a picture of Sun Lung, my favourite of all dragons, sitting at the altar in the museum. Another couple of pictures that Jane Zeng wanted me to include. Most of the people here are my family, and this is Sun Lung walking up the road waiting to start parading. At this point he's not parading. And this here is my uncle Tyrone, carrying the head of the dragon during the actual parade part. Now, moving on to some really interesting stuff. Okay, does anybody know who that man is? Mr. Richard Branson? Does anybody know who Mr. Richard Branson is? Hands up if you do. Right, for those of you who don't know who Richard Branson is, he is a British entrepreneur, a very successful one at that. I have a story to tell you. Okay, on the 5th of July 2017, he had a publicity stunt using one of our dragons from Bendigo in Melbourne. Now, he wanted to borrow one of our Bendigo dragons, Yalung the Night Dragon, to publicise his inaugural new direct flight he created from Melbourne to Hong Kong. During this promotion, he found out that Bendigo wanted to buy a new dragon as the 1969 dragon Sun Lung was due to retire. He asked the audience and press, how much would the new dragon cost? A lady in the audience apparently shouted out 750,000 Australian dollars. He then said something like, I won't buy that for you, but I will pay the freight charges once the new dragon is made. So, the short of it is, he paid Australian dollars, $40,000 to have the dragon shipped over from Hong Kong to Australia, which ironically is the reverse direction of the first inaugural flight from Melbourne to Hong Kong. And however, the cargo was so large, it would not fit on this particular Virgin Australia flight, so British Airways took the remaining cargo for free. Now, there's something else that happened which has never happened in history with our family museum. Richard was allowed to keep the head carrier's uniform, and he wore it on that inaugural flight from Melbourne to Hong Kong. The significance of this is that no one is normally allowed to keep any of the regalia clothing for any of the dragon carriers, let alone the uniform for the head carriers. So, Mr. Richard Branson, you're the only person who's been allowed to take that uniform home. Okay, moving on. Another significant thing that happened in my family was in April 1983 when Prince Charles and Princess Diana met my family, my Uncle Russell on the right and Auntie Joan on the left. And this was all during the 1983 tour of Australia. Now, there's something I need to... Oh, hang on. Okay, go back a bit. News had passed to the palace that Australia had the largest Chinese collection of dragon regalia, hence this was probably the reason why my family was asked to show Charles and Di this collection during their 1983 tour of Australia. Now, something I need to tell you. The dragon traditionally only comes out once a year. On Easter Monday, the 4th of April 1983, it was raining. And this was a day before Charles and Di were supposed to come and see our family and the dragon. My Auntie Joan, who is there on the left, to the left of Prince Charles, she went into the Chinese, the museum wasn't built then, but she went into where the dragon was, and she had a pair of Chinese wooden fortune cookies, and she threw them up in the air and they fell to the ground, and I was standing next to her, and the way they fell, she suggested to me that the dragon is not going to be coming out today on Monday, April the 4th, because it's raining, and as you may or may not know, none of this Chinese regalia can come out on a day when it's raining, because otherwise the whole lot would be completely ruined. So that was that, but hang on a minute. Okay, but the other bit that I wanted to say was the fact that it was her, my Australian-born Australian auntie, being the one who threw the fortune cookies up in the air is significant, as you would have thought that it would have been a Chinese elder to perform the task. So, history tells us the dragon only comes out of his cave only once a year, but not for the Easter parade, but just for the royal visit. This infuriated many members of my family and the community at large in Bendigo, as there could have been not one, but two traditions broken. Number one, the dragon coming out twice a year, and secondly, at the wrong time of the year. The point being, Australian Chinese tradition states that the dragon or dragons can only come out during the Easter weekend. Obviously, this is a tradition that was created in Australia, not China, but by the Chinese Australian community. Now, fast-tracking to 1993, as a result of my Uncle Russell setting up the museum, which was now built, I think it was built in 1992, as a result of that royal visit and the subsequent creation of the Golden Dragon Museum, my Uncle Russell became a member of the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for preservation of Bendigo Chinese heritage. Now we come to my favourite bit. I've been talking about who I am and where I come from. This is my mum and dad. And the next photo is my mum as well. My mum was a dressmaker. On the right you will see a gown. She made that herself. And on the left is actually a black and white photo of my mum in about 1956. And she had this black and white photo hand tinted. And in 2014, when my mum passed away, which incidentally she passed away on the same day as Princess Diana when she passed away, but a different year, I went back to Australia to go to the funeral, and my brother and sister presented this print to me, and they said, "We think you might like to take this back to London." And I said, "Yes." So the print of my mum is sitting proudly in my living room in Fulham. And another picture of my sister's daughter, Jade, showing an example of one of my family being a princess in the Chinese parade. Okay, moving on. Now, two more photos to show you, and at the end I have a personal statement for you. This is my second favourite picture of Sun Lung, my favourite of the four dragons. My brother Ricky, and my Uncle Russell. The next bit is my all-time favourite photo. You can't see, the man on the left there, you can't see the sun that he's holding to direct the dragon, but the look on Sun Lung's face, for me, is one of the best I've ever seen, when you consider that you can't change the face, but you can change the angle of the way the dragon is being carried, and actually Sun Lung looks very much alive there. Now, my personal statement to end today's session comes from the heart. And I will read this out like I did everything else. Okay. I certainly don't know if this may be the case that the Chinese came from dragons, but what I can tell you all that is, whenever I think about my Chinese history and I see the pictures I am presenting to you all here, I physically well up inside the whole of my body, and I feel all aspects of happiness, sadness, pride, contentment, talismanship, wanting to inspire others, wanting inclusion in all things cultural. I could use so many more words here, but nothing can describe the feeling I have for this huge aspect of my life, my upbringing. It's in my DNA. I include my Australian English Scottish dad in all of this, because the sum of him and mum having me, creating this conscious being who is forever grateful for the part of Australian history that we all have been a part of, is one of the most extraordinary things in my life. Again, I will mention Jane Zeng for asking me to do this presentation, as she has enabled me to think about many aspects of the places all the members of my ancestors have come from, which makes up the Akashic records of Marcus Nicholson. I also wish to acknowledge Si-Ming Tu and Debbie Ng for their constant encouragement in doing this presentation today. Thank you. Please stand.